Beaming out across the galaxy, this is where conspiracy on the wild side meets the perspective of a lifetime. This is the Free Zone with your host, Freeman.
Hello and welcome to the Free Zone. Well, thank you all so much for continuing to support my work and stay behind me as all the world just goes crazy around us. It's been madness, folks, and it's really difficult to know who you are in this world. I mean, we just had this 4th of July Donald Trump extravaganza on the Washington court. And oh my God, you know, just tales of war, as if that's what we should be known for. He, of course, made a couple of mistakes in his historical content, and of course, that's what everybody's going to point to. This is the honey boo-boo effect, as I have described it, and I think you should be able to see now clearly that as long as we look like buffoons to the rest of the world, the honey boo-boo effect is in full effect. And let me tell you that that 4th of July event definitely was a honey boo-boo situation. Of course, the news would not cover this event, and even NBC seemed to talk right over the president as he started to introduce his flyovers and his interesting speech. The claps of the people out there standing in the rain, I'm not sure that was worth it. I don't even know if talking about this is worth it, but I figured I'd mention it. And of course, the website meltdown. I don't know if you guys know the tension that goes into allowing children to fix my website for me, especially since I tend to know more than they do. But if there ever is a problem with the website, guys, just go to my Twitter feed and see what I'm saying, because Twitter is my last bastion of social networking, guys. It's the only place I can leave you a message in real time. So please follow me on Twitter. It's Freeman Fly, Freeman TV. So in other news, we have mysterious hail falling on Mexico in 90-degree weather. It could have been 100-degree weather. 5 feet of hail fell from the sky. Meanwhile, Starlink, which I have referred to as Skynet, Elon Musk's SpaceX has launched Starlink up into the sky. There were 60 satellites launched in this one rocket launch, and 55 of them are now operational. 5 of them were allowed to burn in the atmosphere to prove that they could burn up. But he is planning, SpaceX is planning 20,000 satellites to be in low orbit. Okay, currently there are 2,000 satellites orbiting the planet on average, but now we're going to have 20,000 of these low orbit satellites that are going to bring Wi-Fi to everyone in rural areas. Aren't we lucky? And let's see how strange things get then. So as we look at this crazy planet, and the president is telling us the nation is as strong as it's ever been, and we see all the division, we are constantly being barraged and attacked in our mental and emotional states, and we really don't know how to get to our personal selves. We don't know how to enhance our personal vibrations or to evolve into this next phase of our journey as we get caught up in all the rigmarole that is life on planet Earth that really should not affect us whatsoever. So today we're going to talk with Asha Gayle Dieleman, Asha Gayle Dieleman, as we start to explore our true soul's purpose and really understand how to keep our personal vibration strong. I would hope to open with some of our more exciting stories of how life can just really be lived and how everything can come to you without you ever even expecting or knowing or intending any of it, and how it can build you. But of course, we know this can't last. Things drop, things fall. This world is crazy. It's hard to keep your vibration high. So please welcome Gayle Dieleman to the show as we try to raise our vibrations in these crazy times. Hey, Gayle.
Hey there, Freeman. really happy to be here with you and all your guests out there.
Absolutely. I had to try and raise this vibration somewhat and try to reflect back on those stories of my own personal stories, even of being on these highs where goosebumps are covering my body. It seems like God is stepping in and guiding me to exactly the right thing that I needed. And now I've moved myself into a different situation where I'm standing still. I don't know what to do. I don't know anyone. And those highs are very low. So I want to work through this with you as we go through these next couple of hours. But maybe we should start at the height. Maybe you and I both managed to make it out to a Mayan ceremony in Tikal, which is definitely a high point in my existence and I guess career, since I was invited out there as the famous Freeman to document this situation that was going on. So maybe we could open with those stories and work our way towards the despair that might be Starlink and its 5G powers. Start high, work low, right? How are you doing? Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself first?
Sure, I can do that. Well, currently I am a teacher and coach. I have a name that I can be found under Presence, Power, and Purpose out there on the web. And I help people work with their personal vibration to balance their personal vibration, get in touch with what that is, so that they can more effectively share their gifts in the world, have more ease and flow in their lives, and understand the highs and well as the lows and the cycles that we all move through personally, cycles within bigger and bigger cycles, so that we can share our gifts with the world more effectively, because Lord knows the world really needs all boots on the ground right now, so to speak, spiritual warriors to step up and contribute our frequency into the mix that at times is very discordant. So go ahead.
Well, it's hard for people to believe that their vibration, their frequency could even, when they're looking at all of the news, and we're living in the World Wide Web world now where everything that's going on is coming your way. And, so people feel like they need to battle things and they need to go after the hypocrisy, when honestly what you're sharing is the idea that your personal frequency alters everything anyway. You don't have to go battle. You can change yourself, and that changes the world.
Yes, exactly. Change is an inside job. And, that's something that I came to myself in my life through trial and error. Back in the day, in the 80s, as a youngster, I was, an active part of the anti-nuclear movement in Canada, and, helped to organize the walks for peace. If people don't know, there were talk about boots on the ground. There were hundreds of thousands of people attending these walks for peace, and essentially demonstrations against the Cold War nuclear madness. So I was helping to coordinate those walks in in the city I was born, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Yay!
Hey, I've been in Winnipeg.
Yeah, good.
Hey, strangely enough, I was in Winnipeg because my dad was building nukes there.
No.
Oh yeah.
In Winnipeg, or just south of the border in Grand Forks or North Dakota?
We lived in North Dakota, and that's where he worked for Martin Marietta building the nukes. But occasionally we would have to go up to Winnipeg, and I never really knew why, but I knew that was Dad's job, was building nukes. So, occasionally I was taken to Winnipeg. This was first and second grade of my life, so it wasn't like I was really knowing what was going on. But I knew Dad built nukes, and I knew that occasionally we had to go to Winnipeg. So I seem to be on the opposite end of your spectrum.
Right, interesting. So hitting the big city of Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, those were times, similar to the times that we're in now, where, our existence seemed pretty precarious with all these, thousands of ginormous nukes pointed at one another, and feelings of hostility and tension between East and West, and the wall, and all of that. So much of that has shifted. The focus has just shifted elsewhere, and perhaps you could say that the threat is even more serious now. Not sure, but anyway, that's where a lot of my education began, I suppose, in alternative realms. I learned a lot. I traveled internationally, actually, with the Canadian Peace Alliance as a delegate. I went to peace conference in Moscow and Athens and Germany, and it was a really big opening experience for me. And along the way, I also learned about media manipulation and how our history can be distorted as well. And that was a huge eye-opener to see firsthand how interviews, my own and other people within the community, how we would be misrepresented, and sound bites would be taken and put in different contexts. And what was a beautiful, peaceful gathering overall, suddenly they might find one little scrabble off to the side somewhere, and then that would become the focus of what happened. That, and the numbers, 50,000 people show up according to our count, which I think was pretty accurate, and they would report 15,000 or something, so those kinds of things. So I got my eyes open to the manipulation of the media and how out of sync we are with reality at that level of things. And and eventually over the years, as I was introduced to meditation and spiritual subjects, and later became a yoga teacher, I began to realize that there's more to this transformational process than the fighting against kind of method that we are so used to adopting in our culture. That we think we're going to go out there and use, power and force of numbers, so to speak, to make the kinds of changes that we want to see in the world. And so along my journey, what I've come to understand is that change is really an inside job.
Complete.
And it sounds trite, really, but we are so much more powerful than we actually realize. Our consciousness is so much more powerful when we're in touch with that part of ourselves. And we've had so many studies and breakthroughs in physics and science and so forth in the past decades that we're really kind of playing catch up right now, but I think we're catching up very quickly to this reality. Science is giving us the same message that the spiritual traditions have for, hundreds, thousands of years, that consciousness is fundamental, and that we are here, having this human experience, this much more limited human experience, to learn lessons, to evolve, to grow, and fundamentally to become more loving, cooperative beings. And the impact of our consciousness on matter is enormous. I mean, we now know we can change DNA, we can, shift waves into particles and particles into waves, and we have all these layers and dimensions of who we are, and our energy field, the coherence of our personal vibration, our energy field can be measured. It radiates out into the environment. We're interconnected with everyone around us. Everything around us is vibrating with electromagnetic energy, out into the planetary systems and out into the cosmos even. And so it's vast, and yet it's very simple at the same time. We just begin with who we are, with our own conscious connection to source, or the source of all being. So yeah, I got kind of long-winded there, but
oh no, not at all. Yeah, very few people get a chance to find out who they are, and it is so true that we started very similar in that I've seen 500,000 people gather in Washington, D.C. to end the IMF and WTO. And of course, it was a massive peaceful protest, no violence, a lot of partying. Even the people of DC broke out their speakers and, had street parties because 50 blocks of DC were shut down for this protest. And yet, as you said, the news showed nothing but a moment of violence. And I don't even know where that happened. And, that made every news story, every news cycle. But of course, the same protest in Portland, just before the one in DC, did erupt in major violence and shooting. And so people felt like they needed to get in the fight. And I felt that way too. After I watched them shooting everybody in Portland, I was like, well, let me go to DC. You do that to me, and I stood in front of those same riot squads, but they didn't. They were nice, but I did watch them arrest 600 people for doing nothing, for just standing there. And you realize that this is not the path, that this isn't going to change anything because, well, as you're showing, the media manipulates everything and your word doesn't get out. And you must realize, folks, how much effort is put into disrupting your consciousness, how much effort they put into distraction and keeping you busy and poor and broke and working so that you never have a chance to actually find out who you are. And I had suggested many times to just kind of do a hobo trip, put your bank account aside and just step out and put your life in God's hands and see what happens. Because then you learn how the true transition comes, how you're just being, your frequency, your vibration alters everything that comes in your direction. And then you affect all those that you reach and those that you don't even reach. So it is much better to focus on the self, but to try to get people, Gayle, to recognize their power. It's very difficult. You can point out, look at all that they do with movies and news and politics and everything to distract you from ever being your own person and ever feeling what you truly are. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I just, I'm feeling kind of moved actually at the moment, just hearing you speak, Freeman, a little bit about your journey and reiterate it all, because I think it's because we so seldom hear truth spoken. We're so, as you said, we're so bombarded with this misinformation. I mean, I opened my eyes to the media distortion in the 80s, but it's only grown more sophisticated and overwhelming since then. And I think so many of us who are on a spiritual path and, start off with really good intentions get knocked out of balance, whether that's, some intentional program running, or whether it's, just our own sort of fears and accumulated life baggage that trips us up. But, it's not uncommon to experience highs and lows on this path, but, to step out on the journey initially, I think there's usually like some awakening moment or a series of moments for us that open our eyes to, some level of truth that we hadn't experienced or that we'd been missing up until some point. And then you begin to investigate. Hopefully you begin to research, you begin to experiment, you begin to take some leaps of faith, really, to explore, to set out on a journey of exploration to discover that which is underlying reality. And well, I know that's been a driving force for me. And, in my 20s, because of the experiences that I was having, in the peace movement, I really, it gave me those inner glimpses, and it also motivated me to really want to study and explore and learn more, learn more about history, learn more about spirituality, learn more about what's really going on, and, make my life a grand experiment. It really seemed that this was a cause worthy of embarking on. And so I actually made a point in my early days of rejecting the material world, the whole monetary system, and the way that you just described it enslaves us. We get enslaved to these 9-to-5 low-paying jobs where, we don't have the time, the energy, or any vitality left to motivate us to want to ask the bigger questions. So I really vowed that I was not going to become part of that system, and really that I wanted nothing to do with the money thing. I just kind of rejected it. I was like, I'm going to start a nonprofit organization. The extra money is going to go into the peace movement. I really need very little to live on. And so I kind of rejected the whole abundance and money thing because it seemed part of this, structure that was oppressing us. And so, that was necessary, I think, to launch me on my journey. But, that belief has also hindered me, through my life as I evolved and grew, and later found myself teaching yoga and needing to open a business to support that teaching path, because there was nobody out there in the 90s who was going to hire me to teach yoga. It was still considered kind of a fringe thing, so going out and taking that leap and signing a lease, putting my life on the line, and then having to work with money and the whole financial, system in order to stay alive. So for me, there's been a lot of challenges on my path, balancing the two worlds that I saw for a while as being quite separate, but the world of spirituality and sort of dedication to sharing one's gifts, one's purpose, and then, the bottom line dollar of having to, charge money for it and pay your bills and make it all work within a financial realm. So over my life path, there's been quite a bit of struggle to come to balance with that, lots of highs and lows, because I'm also a very adventurous spirit. In archetypal terms, I'm probably an alchemist, magician who, pulls rabbits out of hats when I need to. I'm capable of creating small miracles to get myself out of a hole that I've dug for myself. And, that works some of the time, but, the universe has already showed me that, also showed me that it's not great to become dependent on that, because when your vibration isn't strong, as you said, I think at the beginning, we all have moments when we fall into a slump and sort of get stuck and out of touch with that higher vibratory state, and we feel separate and disconnected from who we really are, as this vast consciousness with all this power. We know it's there, but somehow we feel disconnected from it. So I've had many periods of that happening. Successes, big successes, having my own TV show for a while in yoga, training many yoga teachers. That was my life path for a couple of decades at one of the main yoga centers in Massachusetts, the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. It's a big part of my development. So I had all these gifts and all these amazing opportunities. But I've also had, challenges and lows where I've kind of gotten lost and forgotten what I've learned and just kind of wallowed in my misery for a while until I finally just had enough of that. This is boring. and realized that, it's kind of a selfish thing actually we need to go there for a time, I think, because it's where we really learn in those low periods. We learn a lot of lessons from it. We really grow during these times because we have to dig deep into who we are to find the source of our malaise, what it is that is getting us stuck, which is usually a belief system of some kind that has maybe served us at one point in our lives, but it's now outgrown its usefulness. And for me, that had to do with money. It served the awakening of my consciousness. But as I moved forward in life, I needed money I needed financial abundance as well to support the things that I actually wanted to put forth in the world and to support my own well-being and, personal vibration on that level. And I've seen that just with so many other spiritual teachers or alternative people, choosing to live alternative kinds of lifestyles, and so many nonprofit organizations too. I mean, what really limits, getting the message out, so to speak, is just a lack of funds. So I've learned to begin to make friends with the whole money thing and to find some balance and grounding, I guess, in that part of my life as well. But it's a journey. It's a process. It requires self-examination and a willingness to go there into some of the dark places. So this is what I support people that I work with in doing and discovering inside themselves, and to learn to embrace and celebrate actually those low times, because they're like a gift. We tend to think of the peak experiences as being like the real, like, oh yeah, that's what it's all about. But actually, when you look at the bigger picture of why we're here, what we're here to do, we're here to evolve, we're here to grow, we're here to become more loving beings. And so when we have that intention for ourselves, what immediately comes up inside of us is the resistance to all of that. The places inside that are giving us the opposite message of, like, no, stay small, stay safe, your survival is at stake. It's, all these fear-based ideas and that we have been programmed with from the day of our birth, really, through family and culture and all the rest. So, I've forgotten what the question was, Freeman, but...
Oh, that's okay. We're just working through it, The thoughts coming to my mind were how funny it is when people start throwing your advice back at you, and you're
right.
Right, I know. Yeah, it's true. I should lighten up. I should let go. And, what happened to that person that was so carefree? And,
right. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we go through periods when we are unrecognizable to ourselves, and to others. Like, I actually had I had a period not up until quite recently in my life that lasted 10 years of really feeling stuck and just not connecting with my purpose, and just struggle in all different levels. And people who knew me from before, as a teacher and a trainer and all these things, are just like, I'm sure they were very puzzled. They're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens.
It does happen. Yeah.
I always found that when I was on the road, so I always recommend to people, hey, college can wait. Your life can wait. That dead-end job will always be there for you. You can always go and fill out that application and do, get the dead-end job, get your apartment, and get locked down into that situation. But you don't have all of your life to go and explore and actually experience life. You only got this little bit of time, really, before you got to take on some responsibilities. And so before you do anything else, just go into the world. And you find that it awakens this magic within you. And I wonder if you've noticed that it's far easier to produce miracles for others than for yourself.
Well, yes, this is very true. And I think that has a lot to do with our, acculturation and, the ways that we're raised, and religious beliefs about, selfishness and narcissism, and how, we're here, the way to God is to only serve others and to retain, little or nothing for yourself. So I think that's true. And I know that in my own career, teaching classes and, putting a lot of energy out from the heart, really, into supporting and nurturing others, because that's really what we do. A lot of my career path has been as a yoga teacher. It's really about showing up and opening your heart, to who's present, and feeling into the various vibratory states of, who's showing up on any particular day at any particular time, and then opening to source and allowing intuition and moving into a meditative state where you can actually feel what's going on. And for, in the early part of my career, I was very good at doing that. I was very tuned in. I just seemed to have a natural gift for it, tuning in to the sensitivity of others. And, just the right words would come, and just the right kind of prescription in terms of what body medicine they needed, where were we going to go, which asana, what kind of opening into the breath, guiding them in meditations. And so I was very good at putting all of that energy out there. Not so good though when I left class and my, vibratory state lowered back to more sort of what my homeostasis would be. And not so good at applying it to myself. And so I know that I allowed the stresses of, business and life to accumulate within me and was not always applying the same loving energy to take care of my own needs and, nurture myself. And, that showed up throughout. Yeah. So,
well, let's share some of the high stories then. Let's give them examples of how miraculous life can really be, because the majority of the population does not get to experience this because most of them follow the plan. They think that they have to do this, that, and the other to get ahead, and don't realize that there is a life out there waiting for them that they are completely unaware of. And that's what happened, I think, to you and myself. I certainly did not choose this as my life path. It chose me, but that was because I was out there allowing whatever to come my way. And so maybe if we share some of these stories of our higher points to give people an idea and understanding of what that's like.
Yes, let's do that. That's lots of fun. And I just want to say too, I like what you just said, all these experiences kind of magically came your way, but you were part of the process too, in terms of being ready and being open and, putting the question out there, like there must be more, and inviting those experiences in. I think that's a really important choice-making part of the journey. And when you do that yes.
I'm just thinking my first job lasted 3 days and I said, no, not for me. Right. And I just went and lived on the beach. I mean, there was no way I can be a part of that. I just couldn't. And I would rather live in a ditch than do that.
Right. Yeah.
But I didn't live in a ditch, I didn't. My life expanded greater than I could have ever experienced. And to be honest, folks, I always wish that I could show you my bank account so that you would see that I was accomplishing these things with no more than maybe $200 to $0 in my account, so that you could see that that's not what's holding you back. Because I never, ever, ever had any money to do anything that I did, but I did so much.
Absolutely. I totally hear you, Freeman. I'm one of those people also. And, to this day, I will still risk all if my intuition tells me that there's an important opportunity, on the other side. So, thinking back on where all of that began for me, I would say to listeners, for sure, like if you feel this questing within you and this desire within you to want to explore and to grow into your purpose, do it, do it now, as they say, because it does become more difficult once you get, into the structure of a career, and certainly once you have children. Once I became a single mom and a parent and all of that, and had a business to run, there were fewer opportunities, fewer moments of freedom. I'm kind of stepping back into it now, actually, because my daughters are now 19. I have twin daughters, and moving out into the world themselves. So mom's like suddenly got all this freedom again. Actually go wherever I want to go and all of that. But so it began for me in my 20s and into my 30s, and I was preparing fertile ground for these experiences. I'd explored meditation, had a meditation practice, did some Vipassana retreats, and I was, at the time I was a fitness instructor. That was sort of my doorways to frequency and vibration came through music. I don't know if you saw in my bio, but I studied the pipe organ for 10 years. Between the age of 8 and 18, I had lessons of the pipe organ. This is a very different Dutch Protestant kind of thing where they're crazy about pipe organs. But man, what an education for my brain and development of my brain, learning to read classical music and being blasted by those pipes on a regular basis, So there was that, and then later I moved into some dance and movement and exercise, and taught, aerobics classes where I kind of led people in these, music and dance, sort of tribal, movement. I mean, there's amazing resonance and coherence that gets built when we breathe and move together rhythmically. So, that was part of my education. And then somewhere along the line, as I was doing that, and really the first gift, or sort of high frequency experience that came in the form of a gift from one of my students who was quite affluent and had recently visited Kripalu Center, this yoga center in the States, and it had changed her life. And she saw that I had created this community around me through my fitness center, and she thought that I was someone who would be able to share it with other people, and that's what she wanted to do. So she offered to send me on an all-expense paid trip for 1 month to this yoga center and study. And I took her up on the offer. At first wasn't sure if I could. I was like trying to manage things with my business, all the financial stresses. But at some point I went, this is something I can't say no to. The universe is offering me a gift here through this dear friend and student. And so I embraced it, and it changed my life. I mean, it really did. It changed the trajectory of my life. And I found a form of yoga and a whole spiritual philosophy that really awoke something inside of me, especially because it was a very meditative and energetic sort of chronic approach to being in the body, exploring, really deep inner states actually of consciousness and grounding them in the body and uncovering those places in the body, mind where we do get stuck. And I learned some amazing tools for opening and releasing and reclaiming energy that has been lost and trapped in the body. So that process of education actually lasted for about a 10-year period, where after I did my training as a yoga teacher, I then was invited to come back as a volunteer and participate in the staff of the program. And then as I evolved with that, later I was a paid director of the program. I found myself teaching the program after only, 5 years or so. And then that became a big part of my career. So profound altered states of consciousness occurred a couple of times within that community, which in the beginning, in the early 90s, it's different today, but in the early 90s, they had a guru figure, Yogi Amrit Desai, whose guru from India was a Kundalini master. And so he carried this lineage, this heritage that was really quite powerful. And on a couple of occasions with the residential community, because there was a residential community at the time of between 100 and 200 people. I was there part-time over, I would come and go, a few months here, a few months there, but there were people that had lived in residence in this ashram setting for up to 20 years at that point, and renounced, their worldly possessions and dedicated themselves to living this very virtuous life, which included celibacy, by the way, and dedicating themselves to the practice of meditation and yoga. So that's kind of the context. And so on one of these occasions when we were with the guru, chanting and meditating, you felt the energy in the room just completely shift. Like suddenly we're in another dimension, or someone had just dialed the frequency up significantly. And it was emanating from the figure at the front who was leading, the guru. And I could feel him and sort of sense his being begin to undulate, sort of like he was undulating with energy. It was a very serpentine kind of energy, I have to say. And then that moved across the room of us all, sitting and meditating like a wave. You could feel it row by row as it sort of impacted the people in the room. And people were responding various ways, like you heard people crying and, these sort of joyful sounds and moaning and bodies moving. And, I found my own body moving into this really deep, deep back bend. I don't know if you're familiar with yoga, but kind of like a camel pose where you're just wide open. And under normal circumstances, that would be a very difficult pose for me to do and to sustain for more than, a few seconds or a minute. But that I was effortlessly there in that posture for what must have been 15 or 20 minutes and feeling no ill effects or strain at all. In fact, I was just completely blissed out. And so that was quite a powerful experience. We were all kind of puzzled by it because it didn't come with any context or explanation, really, but it was like an initiation of sorts into a higher frequency state. And some people felt I felt quite ungrounded after it for a period of time. Some people had, felt out of balance emotionally, mentally, sexual energy coming up, all kinds of things were being triggered, and energies, that had been perhaps stifled were coming up to the surface in order to be examined and healed, released. So that was one of those highs. And then simultaneous with my yoga education, I had started in the 90s bringing my yoga students, because we lived in Winnipeg and we really needed to get away in the winters. I started bringing my yoga students to Mexico for yoga vacations. And we went on the obligatory tour to the Chichen Itza pyramid. And I knew nothing about the Mayan culture at that time, but I learned enough from our tour guide to realize that this was really an amazing, advanced, ancient culture that most of us knew very little about, very connected to the cosmos. And so I kind of had an intention after one of those superficial journeys to learn more about it. And then when I went home to Winnipeg, within a few days, books were falling off the shelf. All of this information was coming to me about the cosmic Maya and their connection to the Pleiades star system and how, connected they were interdimensionally and all of this. And I was like, wow, well, I really got to go back. And it just came to me that I needed to go back. And I actually had this transmission, the spiritual message come through that I needed to go back for the spring equinox, which was just a few days away, in fact, or maybe a week away at that point. And that if I did so, I was going to meet my Mayan teacher. So that was one of those moments that you and I just spoke of, where I felt this powerful pull. It was like, wow, this is really a clear, strong message. But I just got back from Mexico. My bank account is emptied. How am I gonna accomplish this? But it felt important enough that somehow I pulled it together and actually got enough money for my ticket and had very little left for anything else. But I just trusted that it was that strong of a message from spirit that I would be taken care of. And I guess I'd had prior evidence of that by that time also, so I was willing to take the leap. Went to Cancun, took the bus to Chichen Itza. There was something like 50,000 people there at Chichen Itza that day for the equinox, tourists and also people there for, doing ceremonies, smaller ceremonies. But anyway, I was there and I was roaming around amongst these big crowds and probably feeling really all the kind of chaotic energy, picking up on all of that, not feeling so centered myself. And I spent hours wandering around going, okay, how am I going to find this Mayan teacher? I don't see any actually indigenous groups of people that look Mayan at this gathering. And so it came to me just to sit under a tree and meditate for a while and chill out and center, and which is what I did. And then after a few minutes of that, when I opened my eyes, literally right in front of me was this group of about 100 people all dressed in white, gathered in a big circle with this Mayan man standing in the middle. And I went, oh, I think this is a cue. I think this may be what I'm here for. So I jumped up, I was all excited, and I joined in and speaking, and there was some mantra meditation and so forth and so forth. And I was like, cool, I think I had my experience here, but I hadn't really connected with a teacher yet. And then walking back to the parking lot to my bus, I met up with one of the women, and she's like, we're on this pyramid tour with Hunbatz Men. He's the leader over there. You should join us. And I was like, what? You're doing a whole week of this? Visiting all the pyramids. It sounded like super adventurous and cool. But I was like, I don't have any money. How can I join you guys? And she's like, just go talk to him. You'll figure out a way. And sure enough, Hunbatz was a very generous soul, and he invited me along on their bus tour. And, I stayed at less expensive hotels than what everyone else was doing. But I got to go along for the journey. And we went many other places in the Yucatan peninsula and did ceremonial, activations at the pyramids. And kind of a long-winded story here, but that was another education over 10 or 15 years, more into the shamanic realm. And then much later, I had another peak experience at the pyramids of Tikal, and I think that you and I can really connect around the Tikal pyramids. I'm not sure, what year was it, Freeman, that you were there?
2007.
Oh, okay. So this was 1999 then that I was at Tikal. And were you introduced to the shaman, the Guatemalan shaman, Wandering Wolf, Don Alejandro?
I have been trying to remember the name of the shaman that I was with. I made some posters with his face to commemorate the event, and it wasn't Don Alejandro though.
Okay.
But he was there, and they did, I believe, the celebration before us, because the Kakuha is the foundation that I was with. They were the first, only, and ever foundation to be allowed to perform the winter solstice celebration ceremony all night long. So for the very first time ever, they were allowed to perform this all night. And that's not to say that I did not face Uzis and shotguns as we tried to climb up to the pyramids. They were trying to stop us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was, I always tell people, you got to read the Celestine Prophecy. I don't know if I could ever just, for me, that was like the book that explained everything that I did not understand that I was already doing. It gave me this foundation to describe the events that were occurring. And
yes.
So, now just the few things that you've covered though is, one, the power of consciousness. Okay. Those Mayans, those Incans, those people building these astronomical conscious structures out of mammoth stone were not getting paid. They had this inspiration. They had motivation, they had movement, they had knowledge, and they inculcated all of that into architecture and in places where it just shouldn't even exist, because they were drawn to this. We can see the power right there in mankind's consciousness that, this will evolve out of the ground if we allow our imaginations and our minds and consciousness to just simply be.
Yes.
And the idea of getting involved. You did not just sit there. When you saw the teacher in front of you, you stood up and participated. This is something most don't do. They talk themselves out of it, talk themselves in circles, get embarrassed, shy, or whatever it is. And you've got to, I'm a very shy person. I know. You have to toss yourself into the mix, into the situation. And then these miracles happen, and good graces come your way. Money's no longer a necessary thing, and you are being guided onto this new path of excitement and adventure.
Yes, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, there were other opportunities when I, who knows what opportunities I missed along the way.
Oh, we miss them all the time.
Myself. Yeah. Exactly.
If you read the Celestine Prophecy, they tell you to interact with everyone you make eye contact with. Which actually, if you pay attention, isn't that many, but it is a lot.
Yes.
If you were to practice that.
I remember the Celestine Prophecy. That was a really important, reference book, I think, for a lot of us who are experiencing, phenomena out of the ordinary and looking for a context to place it in, a way of understanding it, for sure. But wow, Uzis and machine guns, that's intense. I never encountered anything like that in my journeys. Mind you, I was only the one time in Guatemala at Tikal.
This was only one time too. I faced at least 3 different Uzis, and AK-47 and a shotgun along the ways.
Well, I have to say that, my journeying with the Mayan community was mostly in the 90s and a little bit into the early 2000s, because my daughters were born in the year 2000. So I was busy doing other things. But, I think as the Mexican government and the touristas, the tourist organization sort of began to clue into how popular these sites were becoming, and there was opportunities for business, and they began to charge fees, and they became massive tourist sites with a lot of promotion. I think the control of those sites began to set in as well. I've never heard in Mexico of anything like Uzis, but Guatemala is even more kind of on the precipice of violence at all times. I think they have such a intense history around revolution and fascist dictatorships and all of that. So it's probably even more extreme, the sort of crackdown on what may be happening at these sites currently in places like Guatemala. I'm not really sure what the situation is there right now, but certainly in the 90s, it was just the beginning of the opening. I mean, they were only really opened in the 1980s. Cancun and those areas didn't exist prior to, the late 80s. So they were just, little villages with huts up until that point.
I tell you, I didn't want to leave. I was down there on the Adelon, sitting on this volcano at a coffee shop. I had been invited there by a bookstore known as Zazuvia, which was named after the surfing the Zazuvia, which I actually haven't read, but I think I have a copy now. But anyway, they were the ones that invited me down there, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any idea of what I was in store for. I was just given this list of places that I needed to get to this final place. And once I got to the final place, then everything else would be covered for me. I took that flight and I landed in wherever. I don't speak a lick of Spanish. I was guided to the wrong bus, and then to the wrong bus, and then to the wrong bus, and then finally found out the bus that was the right bus had left. So then I was put on a bus that I had no idea where it was going. And they told me it was now the new right bus. I had to trust them on that. No one really could speak English. So now I'm racing down this bus, and that bus ride is long. And so I was very sick. I vomited on my shoes a lot during this trip. And I hit my head so many times that I thought that there was some shaman behind me trying to keep me like the monkey on Jungle Tale, just keeping me in line. I swear I hit my head 1 billion times. It was crazy. It was like I was yelling at the shaman that was invisible. I get it. I don't know what I get, but I get it. You don't need to hit me in the head anymore. But I kept finding my way down. Now, prior to this trip, I was practicing the Celestine prophecies. I was sitting in a park in Lawrence, Kansas, and I was practicing the insights, as they're known in the Celestine prophecy. And I would go and speak to anyone that I felt the intuition to do so. Saw this couple sitting at a park bench and said, I need to go talk to them. My friends were like, you're so weird. And I'm like, yes, I know, but I love it. And I went and I spoke to these people, and I still have the piece of paper that they wrote down for me, all the places to go that were related to Palladians. And this included Tulum, Palenque, San Cristobal, Tikal, and others. And they had told me where I could go meet the, what were they called? Bruja, the witches that would give me the brew for altered states and all of that. And it was funny because I had told them I came over because I was practicing the insights. And of course, I didn't even have to mention what insights. They said, oh yeah, we read the Celestine prophecies as well, but we're more with the Palladian view. And they ran, and I said, oh, I just finished the first book from Barbara Hand Clow, I believe. They were like, oh, well, then it's you we're waiting on. And they ran over and got the second book in the series and brought it back to me. Well, so It was
Go ahead.
cool. Yeah. So then I end up on my Mexican trip, or Guatemala trip, which, is almost a decade later. And I'm making my path all the way down. I'm, going through my shaman trip of vomiting and being bitten in the head by everything. And I forgot to exchange my money, so I didn't have quetzals by the time I got down to the boat that was supposed to take me across the bottomless lake to the volcano where I could find the kids at Zuzuvia, right? So thankfully, they just happened to be standing right there on the shore and paid the 15 quetzals for me to get across the lake. And the journey then began. And there was some point I was going to get to in all of that I had started. Well, the map of those that they had given me, I found that again when I came back home, and everywhere they had told me to go was the exact places that I went. I mean, I went to San Cristobal, I went to Tulum, and all of it by accident. I remembered that map, didn't even look at it before I left. I didn't even know where I was going. And I hit every single spot that they had told me to go. And I remember thinking once I found the map again, I was like, oh man, I forgot about the brujas, the witches that would, give me the brew. But, they had given me all that information almost a decade earlier, and I didn't take it. I didn't use it. I forgot until I found it again. And was like, oh my God, I was exactly on target. And again, I had no idea. And the final part, to skip over the ceremony and all the amazing things that happened, but to jump to this other conclusion, which you also kind of alluded to, and that is the things that stop you and get you in the way, and you think it's a problem, but it's actually a solution. On the way, leaving this beautiful island paradise, I didn't want to leave. I really didn't want to leave. I could have stayed there. Other than the Montezuma's revenge I constantly suffered, I swear, so much. Oh my God. But a mudslide fell in front of the shuttle that was taking me to the airport, and we were trapped there.
Oh
and
my God.
I have a picture on my Instagram. You can see the sheer glee in my face as I'm like so happy that my shuttle has to bring me back. I can't leave. I'm so happy. That mudslide fell in front of the highway. Unfortunately, they found another way, and they got us up the mountain another direction. But this left me in San Cristobal, missing my flight. Just another, I gotta share this. I can't help it. It's coming out of me. So I'm trying to figure out my situation. I had been to San Cristobal on the way down, and I loved it. I had a favorite restaurant already that I wanted to go back to, but I couldn't find the hostel that I needed to stay at. All the streets looked the same, and without speaking English, I mean Spanish, I didn't know what to do. And so I wandered the streets with this big heavy backpack and a tent and all my gear, just like lugging it around and around in these crowds of people trying to just find this one random little door in all of these doors. And I finally found it. But at one point I was standing on that corner just staring off in desperation, like, oh my God, this sucks. I can't find anything. I don't know what to do. And I'm standing there. And then it was the right street. And that's when I found my way. So I dropped all my gear off at the hostel. I've become good friends with them there. And, within a day, right, it's like lifelong friends. I met people there that I knew already. And then I left and went down the street, and there was this Hispanic and Mexican guy standing on the exact same corner with the exact same backpack, with the exact same tent, standing in the exact same place I was, looking as desperate as I did. And when I was standing there, all I wanted was somebody to come by and say, hey, do you need a hand? So, of course, that's what I did. I walked over. Here he is in the exact same, it was the same tent, man. It was crazy. I'm like, hey, do you need a hand? What's the problem? And he's like, yeah, I'm trying to find these girls from Sweden. And we're going to Tulum, and we're supposed to go have a good time. Do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah. And so I took them out to dinner because at my favorite restaurant, we went and we found the Swedish girls. And the next thing I know, I got Tulum all to myself for New Year's Eve, or Palenque, all to myself, just to us, our little group. Everybody else wasn't there. I don't know why. but it was completely empty. And so instead of, being all upset that I missed my flight, that a mudslide fell in front of my, instead I'm partying it up in Tulum or in Palenque with the Swedish girls, and then on the beaches of Tulum, and then we ended up at the Palenque, and all of the people that were at the ceremony. Now, this is one other intriguing point of the ceremony that I attended, was that the Mayans had prophesied that a tribe of nations would gather for this particular ceremony and that it would happen and go all night long. Well, we did. There was a tribe of nations that gathered randomly. None of us had any clue that the others were coming. And as we all sat in a circle getting ready to go up to the pyramids, we realized that we had represented every continent on the planet and numerous nations, but we certainly had the globe covered with this tribe of nations that had miraculously just shown up to this. Well, now, after missing my flight, after doing all of that, and ending up in Palenque for New Year's Eve, everyone was there. All of the people that I had experienced this last ceremony with were at this gathering at Palenque, and I got to say goodbye to everyone. I got to have the finals. It was crazy. Then I'm in Australia, right? I'm flown to Australia by some millionaire. This is years later. And I'm telling this very story of what happened in this group of, these hippies had taken over a drug dealer's house that had been run out of Australia. They had this mansion. Anyway, all these hippies living there. And I'm telling this story. And there was one girl who was somewhat sexually attacked by one of the Mayan shamans in a different ceremony. He had kind of trapped her in the darkness of the pyramids, but she was a very large German girl and just pushed him down by his head and walked away. It didn't really offend her or bother her much, it seemed. But I'm telling this story in Australia, and she says, "Freeman, I'm over here." That stuff just doesn't happen. She was in the room in Australia in this hippie's house that are taking over this, what?
Wow.
And these are the kind of things that people need to experience, that they need to get out and live so that they can see that life is so much bigger than this contrived thought. And
oh my gosh.
We're back to, building conscious experience. So
Absolutely.
I had to release all that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing it. I mean, I think you received some really important empowerments there, in that whole experience, divine intervention via mudslide, which, leads to the next synchronicity and then the next and then the next, a powerful experience of just how magical things can be when we're in that zone and we allow ourselves to open to it. And I'm sure it empowered you to step into, your purpose, which came, I don't know, when did you start? It's around 2008, wasn't it, that you started your YouTube channel and teaching and all of that kind of thing?
No, actually, I was invited to this because of my TV show.
Because of it. Oh.
So YouTube didn't exist yet. Google didn't exist yet. You had Access Television. So I sat in the chair right after Alex Jones got up,
Oh, cool.
So it was 2004, actually, when the TV show began.
Okay, good. Well, incidentally, those books you mentioned, Bringers of the Dawn and Barbara Hand Clow, The Pleiadian Agenda, those were the books that fell off the shelf for me.
No way.
That motivated me to jump on that plane and go to Chichen Itza. So, yeah, I think they awakened a lot of us to the bigger picture at that time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't set that stuff aside. I have loved Pleiades for my entire life. I would look longingly up at those distant seven sisters and just feel so homesick and wish I could just go. And I never read a Palladium work. It was 1970. But I've always had that connection all my life. And then to find out other people actually, had communications with Pleiades, and then you find out these secret societies are in communication with Sirius, and, everything starts to get really weird as you start to realize how life actually is on the planet. But Gayle, can you believe it? We have chatted this first hour away in amazing time, and we have so much more to go. So thankfully, we have another hour to go.
Yay!
And I know we're going to dig deep. We're going to go more into the 5G fear, this idea of Starlink, of SpaceX's new Wi-Fi going out across the globe. 20,000 satellites. My God, that's going to be crazy.
Yes.
And lots more stories of ups and downs because, you know, it's easy if you're just out there in it, but try and bring yourself to it is much more difficult. And I'll tell you, folks, I'm right there with all of you of trying to rise back out. And we're going to share some of the methods of getting out of the cycle of despair and loneliness, this epidemic of loneliness that we have going on. So first of all, I have to thank Steve Mercer for bringing me all these amazing, wonderful people. If you want to write Steve and thank him yourself, it is producersteve@freemantv.com, and send your guest suggestions in so that we know who you want to hear from, and tell Steve how great he is for bringing people like Gayle onto the show. And I always want to say, you know, yeah, money's a weird factor in all of this, but it's the only way it keeps going. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you know, just come over, try it for a month, and you know, it just a little donation, $8, and it goes, and you'll get, you know, 14 years of backlogs and everything. And I'll tell you, there is no such thing as an old show on here. You can go back and back and back, and you'll find that we just keep talking about more and more and more, and you will learn more and more and more all along the way. It's been a long path. So if you're just new to this, start at the beginning. Go to the Freeman perspective. Watch the Freeman perspective on freemantv.com and start there, because that's where the hypothesis begins and everything extends from there. If you really want to get to find your centered self, Asha Gayle has 30 years of teaching going on. She's been at this for a long time and has been doing the life experience of bringing the magic and synchronicity and teaching this to others, along with wellness of mind and body, which is so critical, especially the body part, to feel the peace that we'll need to make the transitions that we're going to go through. There's no escaping it, folks. So there's no reason to be sitting in anxiety, pain, and loneliness. You can release this stress. You can release your ways out. And having someone like Gayle to guide you along the way is one of the best and really only ways to get out of your own head. So Asha Gayle Dieleman. Sorry. It's spelled Dieleman. Just so those people can get that. Asha Gayle Dieleman.com. And you can subscribe to her newsletter, get in touch with her, hook yourself up, find your life's mission, and continue this constant study of what consciousness could really do for this planet, because it's so more important than getting out there and fighting riot squads. We've been there, we've done that. It doesn't help. But it is a fun adventure. So, you know, so Gayle, you want to give anything else that might lead people to you, and any last words as we move on into the members section?
Oh, just so many other stories are coming back about.
Oh, we're gonna tell them. We're gonna tell them.
We'll pick up the thread in the second hour. I'm so glad we have that second hour.
Me too. And it's so much more fun because we can get a lot more personal. We don't have to worry about everything that goes out of our mouths, because you know, only the people that want to be there are there. So that makes it far simpler. So guys, get over to Asha Gayle Dieleman and .com. Of course, it's linked right here in the post for you. And follow me on Twitter so that you can find out whenever something's going wrong on freemantv.com. I can tell you straight there without that. And we're going to get into how to release ourselves from this situation, because that's all that matters. But more and more stories coming your way. Stay tuned. And the rest of you guys, we will see you next week.